Hi everyone. The consensus was for me to introduce everybody. So as Gail mentioned, Nick Cook, GM of Marketing from MadMex, and Gail Halbert, Head of Client Service from Hearts of Science. So really excited to be discussing the MadMex campaign, challenging brief from ultimately a bit of a challenge of brand, but such a good example of where we used technology infused with data and creativity to bring to life this wonderful concept of quick service media for QSR and some great results for the client. So without further ado, we'll get into it. Nick, I want to sort of kick off by going right back to the beginning of this process and understand a little bit around why programmatic digital out of home was considered as part of the media mix for the campaign.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me today. So I'm not sure if everyone knows of MadMex, but we're a national QSR brand. We've got around 70 restaurants all around the country. But our, I suppose, development strategy is primarily in food court environments. So we function very much as, I suppose, like almost like an impulse brand. And we need to show up at points of purchase when, customers need to be kind of walking into a food court and immediately thinking of MadMex. And if they don't know about us, we've got to educate them super quickly. And I think the stat was, 13 seconds before. So, and part of our business model is that we focus on lunch and dinner. We kind of don't do breakfast. We don't kind of do that 11 a.m. day part. We don't do a afternoon day part. It's just those two key points during the day that we really need to kind of smash it out of the park. So I suppose programmatic out of home, it was probably chosen in the sense that it aligns really well with what we need to accomplish as a business. We need to be really, I suppose, flexible in terms of how we buy our media. And I think that one of the challenges you have, I suppose, with more traditional out of home is that you're showing up at times when people aren't actually available to purchase from you. So that was a really, I suppose, important part of it. And I think the other part of it is that I'd probably almost classify us as an SME. I think, I went to the Ad News Awards I think we were nominated for the small budget, and small budget in the Ad News was defined as $500,000. I was kind of going, far out, that's like literally half my annual budget. So I think that, we needed to find a way to maximise our time in market. And, but I suppose, as, Byron Sharp says, you just got to be always on and always kind of showing up in front of customers. And I think that programmatic out of home offered a really great way for us to be able to do that.
Nice. Gail, I am going to throw the questions to you, but I've left the clicker up here, so I'm just going to grab that very quickly. But Gail, from your perspective, why was programmatic out of home considered in the media mix for this campaign?
Thanks, Bex. I think the most important thing for us was really being able to hack that consumer journey. So I know Siggy kind of mentioned that 13 seconds to capture that consumer attention as they're going into purchase. But we really looked at time of day, time of week targeting, which really allowed us to extend the length of the campaign as well, right? Because it became super effective in terms of the budgets we were working with. And most importantly, it just allowed us to be super agile. So we could go in and handpick all of the individual sites that we needed around each of the stores, which ensured quality throughout the campaign. And then just that agility to market, so being able to flex up and down as we needed to.
Gail, programmatic was relatively a new concept for the team. Were there any barriers that you faced when you were putting it forward as a solution?
Look, I think the most important thing for us was really just being able to grasp what data we needed and how often we needed that in the right format. So we can talk a bit about that. But just being able to, we're super lucky with Nick as a client who's open to testing and learning. And just trying new things with us, and as with any new sort of test and learn, we had to work through that whole process together. But yeah, just that data piece was super important, and being able to activate off the back of that.
And Nick, your perspective?
Yeah, I think I'm going a little bit off script. I think what Paige said before was really interesting in terms of traditional programmatic. Throughout different businesses I've worked on, the black hole of digital was kind of a phrase that was often thrown around, and I think it was pretty true for programmatic display, particularly in terms of digital display. And I think that being able to have assurances that it was going to show up when we kind of needed it to show up was really important. I think that we worked really closely with the team at Hearts and obviously you guys at Vista in order to make sure that the inventory we were getting was really strong inventory and it was something that our franchisees were going to be able to see and understand. And then I think the other bit is obviously coverage is also important. Like we're a franchise brand and we've got as I said, I think we're about 80% franchise. So we need to make sure that we have every single restaurant in our network covered. What we did find with this process was that we had about 70% coverage, so we had to upweight other channels for the restaurants that didn't have it. But I suppose on the flip side of that, the really great thing was that it gave us kind of a control group. We had the group that could run the programmatic out of home, and then we had a control group in terms of to measure any kind of sales changes that didn't have it in market. And I think that that's kind of where we saw some really interesting results.
Yeah, awesome. Love that point around the ability to lean in and target those franchisees through the platform, but also, Gail, to your point around the agility and responsiveness needed when we were utilising that data to really cut down on that sales to media activation timeline. In terms of the execution, Gail, kick us off with what you did and how that came to life amongst the teams from an activation perspective.
Yeah, sure. I think this was really the base of the whole campaign, right? Was we had a data link set up between Hearts, Mad Max, and Vista, and we were receiving overnight sales. So when my team would walk in the morning, the first thing they would do is sit down, analyze the sales data, and we had established a baseline of activity. So anyone any of the stores performing below that baseline, we automatically switched on the next day so that we could give them that extra push that they needed just to drive sales. And then we deactivated the stores that we had seen performing really well the previous day. So again, it's just that sort of real life example of being agile in market and being able to operate in real time, which we haven't been able to do in out of home previously.
Nick, obviously your team was heavily involved in the execution as well. Can you give us some context and insight around that from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I think like sales numbers, like a day in QSR is friggin' feels like a lifetime sometimes. You're like operating super quick, and I think that our baseline budget is basically set on a like-for-like sales growth rate that we kind of forecast. So every year we want every restaurant to perform better than what they had in the previous years. So what we did was send the team at Hearts and Science any restaurant that had dropped below our like-for-like sales number that we wanted them to hit. Obviously only in restaurant sales, delivery is another whole kettle of fish, but we just focused purely on that. And then I think the other thing we did was we looked at all the restaurants, and every restaurant's completely different in terms of the type of customer type, the type of buyer that they get, and they all have, I suppose, relatively bespoke challenges. Like some of them, they might need to increase their basket size because they're already doing really well in terms of customer count. Other restaurants might have a customer count problem, so therefore a value message is probably going to work a lot better. I think what you see in front of you is probably one example. I think there was a fair few examples in terms of creative and offers that were run, and we have, I suppose, tested a fair bit in terms of what works best. And I think it does work really well in terms of a short-term sales driver. I'm sure we'll get to, and as you can see.
Love that. I think when we're looking at the sum of all those parts, the creativity, optimizing the data in near real time, and then also having everyone sort of hands-on tools to do that could have got quite messy. And I think that being able to just do that through the ease of the tool obviously helps to facilitate some of those transactions. Look, really keen to sort of get stuck into some of the results. Nick, from a success perspective, what did that look like for the campaign?
So obviously sales, it's kind of, you're kind of living and dying by a number. So I suppose we were just making sure that we were achieving like-for-like sales growth of we expected every restaurant throughout the year to a minimum of 3%. And so that was kind of the main focus for us. And what we did see, as you can see on the screen, was that for the restaurants that ran it, had the ones that were exposed to programmatic out of home, they saw a 9% sales uplift. What the ones that didn't have it run, they still had a sales uplift. There's obviously market conditions and all that kind of thing that go into it. So they saw around a 6.5%, 7% sales uplift. So that gap of 2%, it's, you know, I think that you can correlate that back to the different types of media activity. I'm sure there's other variables. It might be more than 2%, might be less than 2%, but I think that there is definitely a really positive correlation in terms of programmatic out of home driving sales, and it's something that we are going to continue to invest in. We've seen the results. Our franchisees have kind of gone, no, it's no longer a black hole. I can walk down out into the food court and I can actually see it running. So I think that that's really is a massive advantage for me, because in previous roles, it's been quite a hard thing to actually manage, particularly with other stakeholders. So I think, the sales and the kind of the transaction numbers you can see there have really kind of, I suppose, just done a fantastic job for us.
Awesome. We are close to time, but Gail, from a media perspective, have you got anything to add on performance and metrics there?
I'll be super quick, Bex. So, look, I think in a traditional sense, we reach nearly 3 million Australians, which is always awesome, right? Particularly when we're working with fairly tight budgets. But I think, to Nick's point, the most important thing was that we drove business results at the end of the day. So we drove that uplift in footfall for individual stores, and we could see that. We could actually quantify that through data. But then again, basket size increase as well, which is just super important. So overall, great campaign. We're super proud of the work.
Awesome. Thank you.